During a very different era in this fictional universe, even some of the criminals were almost respectable, instead of the current story where we have characters like Joffrey or Ramsay. About 20 years before the current events of Game of Thrones in the books, an outlaw group being referred to as the Kingswood Brotherhood was growing more and more threatening to the crown. The Mad King, Aerys Targaryen II, was in power during this time, the worst man to deal with this kind of situation. He was already paranoid to a point where he believed everyone around him wanted him dead. So when a group of fearless criminals are actually hunting highborns in his backyard, well, this set him off. Luckily for Crazy Aerys, he had capable people by his side. Within the Crownlands, the location anyone ever talks about is the capital of the Seven Kingdoms, King's Landing, where the royal family resides. But just a little south, on this region's border, is the Kingswood, where all this lore takes place. That same forest where King Robert Baratheon lost his life to a boar he was hunting. The Kingswood is actually the customary location for a king to go hunting. The crown has its own private area within the forest, reserved only for when a king has the urge to hunt, which Robert usually did. It became somewhat of their own playing grounds or backyard, since the capital was full to the brim with people and structures, though people had been living here in this forest long before the Targaryens. The Kingswood is so vast that villages filled with commoners are scattered throughout, and that's where a major problem arose. The Targaryens had everything and anything they wanted. Taking away some of the land from simpler hunters or farmers built up resentment. It's hard enough bringing home a deer for your family without limitations of where you're allowed to gather your food. And that was just one issue. Whenever the king and his party came around, or anyone of high birth passing through the king's road, some felt they had no obligation to pay for the goods and services provided to them, like meals. The crown provided nothing for these small folk, only took and took. And who would listen to them when all their problems were a result of Targaryen laws? Just imagine a peasant complaining about the king to the king. How well would that go? These circumstances created a ripe opening for an outlaw to establish him or herself as a Robin Hood type villain. And there was the perfect man in the neighborhood for this job. The leader of the Kingswood Brotherhood was Simon Toyne, who hailed from a noble house in the Stormlands that lost everything to the Targaryens just a few generations back. One of Simon's ancestors fell in love with one of King Aegon the Unworthy's mistresses, and it cost him his life. Aegon had countless mistresses throughout his twisted life, but he was as greedy and lustful as it gets. So he had this Toyne brutally killed, dismembering him piece by piece, with the mistress watching before her own death under treason. After hearing how their brother was wickedly slaughtered, 2 other Toynes sought revenge from the king, but couldn't even make it to Aegon the Unworthy before being killed by the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard at the time. A little foreshadowing for what happens to Simon Toyne, who himself faces off against a man who will also be Lord Commander. House Toyne lost everything from this situation and spiraled downward to a point where by 281 AC, one of the only known living members was an outlaw. The Kingswood is partially in the Stormlands, that's the border the Crownlands share, so it makes sense why Simon Toyne chose this location to start his operation and make it his hideout. The forest is referred to as being the perfect place to hide. The plan was to kidnap traveling highborns and ransom them back for gold. Soon enough, this outlaw was the leader of an infamous brotherhood, with members of renown including the Smiling Knight, Big Belly Ben, Oswin Longneck, the Thrice Hanged, Fletcher Dick, Ulmer, and the lone female, Wenda the White Fawn. I'm sure there were others, but who has the time to come up with dozens of names and epithets? Martin's only one man. Plus, the number 7 is a recurring theme in Westeros. The 7 Kingdoms, 7 members of the Kingsguard, Faith of the 7, and here, the 7 outlaws that comprise the Kingswood Brotherhood. Things weren't all happy-go-lucky, like in some fairy tales about outlaws protecting the less privileged. There were moments when things turned ugly after targeting a noble. The Smiling Knight, who hasn't been given any other formal name, seems to be the worst of them all, even though he didn't lead. One of Mace Tyrell's cousins, Victor Tyrell, was killed by the Smiling Knight. The outlaws would prefer to ransom highborns off, back to their rich relatives, but Victor Tyrell was a knight, so he wouldn't sit back quietly during an ambush. The Smiling Knight was the cruelest of the bunch, and probably got a kick out of taking the life of a member belonging to one of the great houses, a crime that would have every house on high alert. It was clear no highborn was safe in these parts of the Kingswood. We don't know how exactly the Brotherhood was protecting the small folk living in the forest villages. Simon Toyne was likely just ordering his men to strictly attack highborns and other criminals in the woods, while leaving the citizens alone. If his actions are motivated by the severity of his grudge towards Targaryens, like we're led to believe, not actually giving the small folk a cut of the gold would make the most sense. This type of grudge lasts generations, and just driving away non-paying bastards and thieves would be enough in his eyes. Doing this gained the love and support of the small folk. When their reputation reached the Mad King, men were dispatched to take care of the situation. But with the villagers siding with the Brotherhood, they were infinitely more difficult to deal with. Even if they were found, they knew the land best and were being sheltered. Villagers had no reason to cooperate with the people trying to detain the only ones with their interest in mind. So the Kingswood Brotherhood grew more and more infamous while avoiding capture. Their boldness reached new heights when attempting to capture Princess Elia Martell, Prince Rhaegar's wife and mother of his children. The Lord Commander of the Kingsguard was Sir Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, who successfully protected his escort but was injured in the process. His hand injury prevented him from pursuing them any further. With the Lord Commander out for the count, the Mad King sent his best men from all over the realm to take care of this problem that was surely keeping him up at night. It didn't take much for that to happen, so I take that back. The Mad King was in full panic mode. The deadliest fighter in the realm was let loose in the Kingswood under Aerys' command, Sir Arthur Dayne, one of the Kingsguard. If that wasn't overkill enough, Barristan Selmy accompanied him, another member of the Kingsguard. Others, like the future hero Jaime Lannister, who was just a simple squire at the time, by Lord Craecall's side, and random fighters joined in too. But before they could find the Brotherhood, another highborn was captured, this time Lady Jane Swan. Even with the proficient killers Arthur Dayne, Barry, and the massive Lord Craecall, no progress was being made on locating the outlaws. Mindlessly searching the forest was getting them nowhere if the villagers were sheltering them. Arthur Dayne came up with a new strategy to turn the tide in their favor. Jaime recalls that instead of just demanding the small folk provide information, Arthur Dayne believed they first needed to make them love them. The issues the commoners had with the crown were far easier to deal with than the Kingswood Brotherhood and their tricky ways. Jaime says in the 4th book, while reminiscing on what he considers to be the best moments of his life, he paid the small folk for the food we ate, brought their grievances to King Aerys, expanded the grazing lands around their villages, even won them the right to fell a certain number of trees each year and take a few king's deer during the autumn. The forest folk had looked to Toyne to defend them, but Sir Arthur did more for them than the Brotherhood could ever hope to do, and won them to our side. After that, the rest was easy. Before the final confrontation, Jaime's fellow squire would also be captured, Merritt Frey, a larger teen who was strong, but not the brightest and most skilled. He was quickly ransomed back to Lord Summer Craecall, but not before one of the White Fawn left her mark on the kid. Seems like she had this sick habit of branding captives with her symbol, right on the ass. It's like she wanted the poor bastard to remember her forever, while striking more fear in other nobles, humbling them, a reminder they're sacks of flesh like everyone else. Merritt Frey kind of deserved it though. He was a piece of shit bully growing up. Branding the symbol of a white fawn and her name being Wenda the White Fawn hints at her being a possible member of House Catherine. Their sigil has white fawns on it, and they also happen to hail from the Stormlands, ruling in their castle appropriately named Fontaine. She could also be a bastard from this house, which would explain her not having a family surname and just an epithet. She wouldn't be hunting highborns if she was a highborn herself, would she? Merritt couldn't sit down properly for a couple weeks, but soon enough he was ready to join in the fight with the others. Jaime, along with every other aspiring hero, had his eye on the Smiling Knight, the most dangerous and infamous of them all. The Smiling Knight was a madman, cruelty and chivalry all jumbled up together. He didn't know the meaning of fear. Jaime compares him to the mountain of his time, being half as big but twice as mad, and the mountain's already pretty insane. Being the one responsible for taking out the Smiling Knight would be any squire or knight's greatest career achievement. So Arthur Dayne and Barristan, now with the people's support, found the Brotherhood while rescuing Lady Jane Swan. A huge fight ensued, with Merritt once again being the one to suffer. He was hit in the head with a mace that broke his helm and left him unconscious. This could have been Big Belly Ben, because next, Summer Craecall almost got hit with a similar attack to the head if Jaime didn't jump in and save his master. Big Belly Ben escaped Jaime, but his target was the Smiling Knight anyways. 15-year-old Jaime held his own during their clash, but Arthur Dayne would have to take over for him, while Barristan Selmy took on the leader, Simon Toyne. Even this young, Jaime was one of the best fighters in the realm, but the men around him were living legends. The Outlaws Longsword had so many notches by the end that Sir Arthur had stopped to let him fetch a new one. "It's that white sword of yours I want," the robber knight told him as they resumed, though he was bleeding from a dozen wounds by then. "Then you shall have it, sir," the Sword of the Morning replied, and made an end of it. Sir Arthur Dayne, aka the Sword of the Morning, fought with his great sword Dawn, a mythical weapon that his family's founder claimed to have forged from a meteorite. It's stronger and sharper than your average steel, and has this odd pale white color to it. Arthur Dayne ended the Smiling Knight's life by delivering what he wanted. Simon Toyne was killed by Barristan, a future Lord Commander, just like Simon's ancestors, and Lady Jane Swan was rescued. Jaime was knighted by the man he idolized most for his valor during the campaign. The same couldn't be said of Merritt Frey, who had to be sent home since he could never fight again after his injury. This is a major moment in Jaime Lannister's character arc. Even to this day, he strives to be like Arthur Dayne and always asks himself what he would have done. Even with all his arrogance, Jaime still considers Arthur Dayne to be a better knight. He thinks that somewhere along the way, he himself became the Smiling Knight instead of the Sword of the Morning. Jaime is under the impression that every member of the Kingswood Brotherhood died that day, but there's one still alive in the current story. Almer was allowed to take the black, and has been a brother of the Night's Watch ever since, avoiding execution. It's like the rest of the world completely forgot about him, like they do with all the brothers. Instead of acting disgraced, Almer proudly boasts of the stories from his past. He claims to be the one who injured the Lord Commander back in the day, Sir Gerald Hightower, by loosing an arrow through his hand. Almer was the one that decided to ambush Princess Elia Martell, all just to steal a kiss from a Dornish princess. He says he stole her jewels and a chest of gold, but the kiss is what he brags about most. His archery skills are still top tier. While giving some tips to a fellow brother of the Night's Watch, he says, "You have a good eye and a steady hand, but you'll need a deal more to best a man of the Kingswood. Fletcher Dick was who showed me how to bend the bow, and no finer archer ever lived. Have I told you about old Dick now? Only 300 times. Every man at Castle Black had heard Almer's tales of the great outlaw band of yore." That's a little more info on Fletcher Dick. Being the greatest archer to ever live is a stretch, but it's nice to get whatever backstory we can. That only leaves Oswin Longneck the thrice hanged without a single thing written about him. The only conclusion we can come to is that he must have had a really long neck to be given that nickname. I've been talking for a while now, so I'll end it here. I doubt we'll get any more backstory out of these guys, but Almer is one of the surviving rangers at Castle Black, so expect some more moments with this old man. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see y'all next week.